Michael Stewart, welcome to Fashion Forensics.
Thank you very much.
Born in Ireland, you grew up painting and wanting to get into the art world at first. After graduating from Royal College of Art in 2017, you started designing and you made your debut onto the London fashion scene through the designer collective Fashionist in 2022 as Standing Ground.
Yeah.
Since then, your brand has grown into one of the most exciting and inspiring names in the industry, one of my favorites. You also won the savoir-faire category for the LVMH prize, and your attention to craftsmanship, detail, and storytelling has created a cult following and has inspired so many people. So I would like to ask you, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I guess in a way, I try to keep myself a little bit back from what I do as much as I can. So that's why I called, you know, the brand Standing Ground and not after me. So I try to often kind of take a step back from it from my personality a little bit, but I guess what has begun to emerge from my work is this sort of pursuit of, I feel like I'm on a journey with the work where I'm kind of trying to pursue something that has like excellence at its core and is built from really, really strong underpinnings of craft and of make and know-how, and I guess I've become a little bit obsessive by things, and the further I go into it, the more I expect from the work in a way. So I guess I've got this sort of mission, with the work, and that's my main focus of it. And I guess that's what kind of makes it a little bit different, is that the goal for the work is to try and get it to this beautiful standard and this like level of excellence. And that's kind of how I'm understanding it from my own point of view as well then.
And I mean, have you managed to find that balance? Has it always come as this balanced way where you separate yourself from your work so you can experience other parts of life? Or have you found that you live inside of what you create?
I think, yeah, you kind of you end up sacrificing so much for it, and in the best possible way, that it's you get balance as you go further through it. I feel, I'm hoping that I'll
Yeah.
balance my life a little bit more, my own personal life. But I feel like it is. I do have a fairly good balance with it. It's not this torturous experience. It's quite civilized in the hours that I keep, that we work in the studio. It's a 10 till 6. We're rarely outside of that unless there's something that really has to be done and pushed. But I think yeah, that was important for me to be able to do this long term. That there is a balancing act that you maintain with it.
Yeah, and it's so important to keep that also in your life. And I think as
Yeah.
creatives, because we love so much what we do and we live in it, and we also work in an industry where you live your life inside of. I think that the balance is something that comes later on as you try to
Yeah.
pull yourself back from
I
it.
think so. And I think, I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to get where I, wanted it to be, or to get notoriety with the work as well. And, I had sort of like a longer journey than a lot of people. And I sort of spent 5 years after I graduated in the desert trying to find, you know, a place for my work. And, even to try and court interest in it, it was a really, really long journey that took sort of perseverance. And I think that was the key with it. And, I recently spoke to some students at the Royal College of Art, actually. And my kind of message was to them that it doesn't happen for everyone quickly, but it's a game of who can wait the longest in a way sometimes. But, I've seen some really talented people sort of slip out of it. And I hate to think that can happen too often, because it's such a difficult it's a difficult world to crack into. Some people they get it much quicker, and others it just takes a really long time. So yeah, it's a game, really.
I want to take you back to the very
Hmm.
start of your visual journey. And what do you remember as kind of one of your first touch points that created your visual identity? Was it in childhood or in teenage years?
I mean, I guess I've always had this very strong connection with the land and with where I grew up in the west of Ireland. I found, you know, being surrounded by so many different ancient touch points and ancient monuments that were in the land. And it's so, Ireland is a very superstitious country. And it's kind of interesting how the superstitions have almost protected the landmarks because people wouldn't dare touch them. There's fairy tales and different sort of
There's a lot of folklore
huge
connected to it.
folklore and massive superstition around ancient monuments, which is a good thing because they've been untouched. And I feel like if that hadn't been in place, they may have not survived as well. So I loved the conversation with different time frames in the landscape and these sort of direct portals between different times
Hmm.
and how we kind of interacted with them. And, you know, where I had lived, there was like an ancient ring fort, which was a settlement from about 4,000 years ago. And, you kind of, you grow up learning about these kind of sites. And I found that really fascinating. And I kind of imagined who the people were there. And I think that was one thing that sort of imagining who they were and what they looked like and what their culture was like, is kind of sets off this world of imagining then. Um, so I really interact with ancient Ireland, but in my own way from an imaginary point of view. But maybe unlike some other designers from Ireland who may pull from more recent history, I don't really engage with that. I don't find it interesting. If that, yeah.
I think it's really interesting what you talk about your relationship with time, because
Hmm.
I think I can really see that in your work. Your work always transcends time. Seasons don't feel like seasons; they feel like worlds. That I think each one of when you look at a collection like yours, each look transcends a very specific feeling and
Hmm.
world, and almost like an archetype of a person.
Hmm.
And when you send me your images, your 5 images that you chose, I was really fascinated by how I could almost see the your world in its entirety, but they come from very different,
Hmm.
different points of time.
Sure.
And what was your thought process when I first asked you to choose your images?
Well, I mean, I could go on I could, if you give me a project, I could go on, for an infinite amount of
You can
time.
go into the
Yeah.
microcosm of
Yeah, I
the
could
detail.
go, I could go on too long, but I kind of felt like I chose those quite quickly and instinctually because there's some of them I've revisited a lot and I've thought about a lot, and others are newer and fresher, but there's like yeah, it's about it's almost a restriction. Actually, two of the images I had a project before when I would had been asked to choose two images that sum up my work, and it was such a beautiful and pure project to do for someone to make them really, really refine what their message is. And I think, in terms of sometimes with if I'm trying to communicate my work to someone, I try to keep someone I'm going to work with, I'll keep it really pure. Or, recently I'd done uh another project where I was asked to provide a mood board, and I don't really work with in that way of creating a mood board of collected images, but I just provided two that made perfect sense,
Hmm.
and I thought there's something kind of like powerful about having a very strong understanding of how you can communicate a huge amount with very few images. So it's kind of like an elaboration on that in a
Yeah.
way.
And if we have to speak about your first image that you chose, which is the image of the comet,
Yes.
tell me a little bit about why you wanted to start with this image. What does it
So
represent?
that is Hale-Bopp that was um, in the sky in 1997. And I remember seeing that as a kid. And I had known that it had appeared in a cyclical sort of 4,400 years approximately. It revisits the Earth. And I remember, being told that, the last time that was here, about the different ancient cultures that would have seen it. And I found that really fascinating that, this was something that the last people who had seen it were 4,400 years ago. And the next people who will see it will be 4,400 years. And I found that really kind of like a really, really fascinating thought to have, that this appears, on that cycle of time. And it's this sort of deep past, present, and a far flung future as well. And we only imagine either side of those, because we can't know exactly,
Yeah.
what first of all, what the ancient past was exactly like, or, of course, certainly we don't know what a far flung future is as well. Um, so that kind of began my interest in ancient culture, I think, as well, because, felt like it's like this sort of beacon or this portal to different times, and it's through our imagination that we can visit them in a way. And I think there's something really interesting about that, and it's that sort of emotional connection point between different past cultures and today.
I think it's quite interesting when you speak about how oftentimes when we think about what's going on around us, outside of Earth,
Mm,
you can feel really you almost kind of become grounded, and you feel like this
mm.
really small piece of a puzzle that there are, life is going to keep spinning before us and after us. So it's
Yeah,
kind of like, how
exactly.
do I make the human experience and portray it?
Totally.
And you started out first in interested in painting,
Mhm.
and tell me a little bit about how those kind of first moments where you started exploring those worlds with painting.
Yeah, I guess I had, like, quite a interesting interaction with painting as a kid. I was kind of quite quite good, really quite adept at painting, and I was almost, I was about 7 years of age, and I was painting landscapes in watercolors, and I was quite skilled at doing them. But because I was so good at them, I was sort of encouraged so much that I ended up, you know, being sickened from it in a way that I didn't
Mm.
touch I didn't I didn't touch a paintbrush for many years, afterwards, until I went to art college. But I'd always thought that I would go to do something creative. And, when it was time for me to, further educate, what I had, initially thought was that I would go back into painting. And I went to an art school in Ireland. And when I got there, I sort of discovered the possibility of fashion, because that was something that was a course there. And in the west of Ireland, it wasn't really in within the culture,
Mhm.
to understand or to know things. But I had obviously, as a teenager, there was things like fashion TV, for instance, where I got my first glimpse of,
Of
you
a
know,
runway and a
yeah,
show
for
and a
runway.
collection.
And I think that was the really exciting thing, was the runway and the motion and everything, moving
Do you remember the kind of first shows that you saw on the TV?
yeah, I remember seeing Valentino, actually. I remember seeing beautiful Valentino show. I remember seeing um yeah, John Galliano, some of the haute couture, some of those really, really extravagant haute couture collections, which I didn't really kind of engage with too much at the beginning. And even through my education, I wasn't that interested
Mm.
totally in. But then I became a little bit more respectful of them in a way, and kind of understood the engineering that goes into creating things like that. Um, but I remember being obsessed with the models, being completely like, yeah, completely obsessed. And I remember there was Katrina Balfe, who's an Irish model. She was one of the
Yeah.
very, very few Irish women that were working in the industry. And I remember seeing profiles on her, and I was like, I'd never heard of her, and no one in Ireland had ever heard of her either. Really, you know what I mean? But she was like,
But at the same time, she was so big in
she was
fashion.
huge in
Yeah.
fashion, and I remember that being kind of like a really interesting thing that I was like, oh, it's like that. It is that thing of like, visibility and seeing someone from where you're from doing something in this kind of
Yeah.
almost unattainable world. And, people don't understand maybe the gravitas of visibility, but how important it is for people to see that that can be,
That can be a possibility
yeah, yeah, yeah,
for you to
exactly.
even start thinking about, okay, how can I go into this
Yeah,
industry?
exactly. And I yeah, that was kind of a really interesting thing for me to kind of see that whole different world. And that was when I was in my early teens, and then I kind of got interested about the possibility of designing, and I kind of like the excitement of and the pace of the course that was
Mhm.
that was in the school. And that kind of took my interest more than anything else, and I went for that, and it was that was where things really obviously began, because I'd never made anything before, never never even tried.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and how was it those kind of first couple of months when you entered and started studying? Did you immediately start finding a technique or a certain point of view, or did that
Mm.
come with time?
Well, I think, when you first are thrown into the deep end, you have no skills. But what I had done for the first piece that I'd made was I actually instinctually draped something. I made something really, really interesting. And when I think back on it now, it was quite amazing that I was able to do that with essentially no skills, but it was my instinct to work with the
Mhm.
cloth and to manipulate it and to form it. Um, but I mean, really, I really properly learned to drape when I went to the Royal College of Art, and I worked with the pattern cutter there. And my kind of thoughts on going to masters was to really sort of develop what I had wanted to do, to really give myself an arsenal of technical ability, and to kind of really get a grasp of what, to allow myself to do technically what I have in my mind.
Yeah,
So that was the thing that so it came a little bit later, but I was kind of doing it through my earlier studies in my own way. Um, but I kind of, it's something you develop over years anyway, and it takes a long time to do it. I still develop it, and and it's kind of like it is a life's work to become, someone who's really, really skilled at draping, and
yeah.
but it was my initial instinct to do that.
And I mean, for you, your kind of outlook on your design has always been very grounded and very human. Like it
Mm,
comes from a very instinctive place, as you said,
yeah.
which it takes me a bit to the second image that you provided, which is Kilmore.
Mhm,
And I find that just when I look at this image, I really find a nucleus of you in it because
mm,
it kind of brings those references of where you grew up with, but it's also so beautiful in how simple and how it was formed in such an organic
totally.
human way.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why you chose this
Well, I
image.
think it is the sort of first design in the landscape of humans deciding to rearrange stones in a particular way. And, even from the elemental purity of something being a stone that was quite literally turned from, horizontal to a vertical position to stand up. Um, I find that really interesting, and how that's not just something within ancient Irish culture. It's found throughout the world, and how people of ancient cultures had decided on certain elemental, you know, forms that meant something to them. And I kind of resonate with those because there's many different um, variations of them throughout the world. Um, but I felt that there was, some it's the fact that they they really have been standing for thousands and thousands of years, and despite many changes around them, they're still there. It's that enduring um form in the landscape. And
Yeah.
I find that really interesting, and I find how you know how they can be interpreted in different ways, and they mean different things to different people. So I find that there's a certain beauty, and again, their connection point with a different
Mhm.
time. That's what I find that's particularly interesting. And they undoubtedly, don't have a concrete or unified sort of purpose throughout, throughout all cultures. But uh, there's the imagining of ritual surrounding them, and I think that's where a lot of my aesthetic comes from as well. Is this ritual dressing? I find that
Yeah.
kind of interesting, and you can probably see that there's an element of that ritual within the work, and we don't know who or what people wore, throughout antiquity to great detail. We have some records, but I don't try and let that lead me either. It's my imagination, and it's my interaction with
Mhm.
something. So I'm not looking for 100% historical accuracy, as much as I respect that. But from an aesthetic point of view, I find it kind of interesting
Yeah.
um, to imagine what something might have been.
And also taking those little elements and playing with them, subverting them.
Totally.
Is the name Standing Ground?
Yeah.
How did you decide on this name? Because to me, this image I
Mm.
really see quite literally, metaphorically,
Yeah.
like a standing ground. And when you talk about folklore and
Yeah.
nature into the human body and human design, it really kind of just represents this. But tell me a little bit about why you decided on that
Mm.
name.
Well, I did love the idea of, seeing the body as a landscape, and then seeing the landscape as a body, and the interaction between the two, and how, of course, we come from the landscape, and a certain particular landscape, and how, it was something that I was going to name project. I was going to call it Project Standing Ground, was going to be the name of the project, but it just felt like the right thing to, because I hadn't planned necessarily to set up my own label initially, but that's what emerged, and that's what I'm happy has happened, and I'm glad I did it, of course. Um, but I felt like, Standing Ground is quite literally, you know what what my a lot of my inspiration is these standing stones, and the earth. And it's also that um play on words of standing your ground on something, and being quite, staunch in what you are particularly interested in, or what you will and you won't do. And I'm very much like that as a person, and it's very much my personality to be quite firm on what I believe, and what I do, and I won't be swayed easily. So it makes perfect sense, and it is a
Totally.
mantra, as much as it's it's literal in a sense as well. And I think, so many times I've been reminded of why I called
Yeah.
my work Standing Ground. And
It's almost this energy that always has your back
yeah, I
when
think
you're
so.
powering through being, owning a business or in
Yeah.
this landscape of fashion, which changes so quickly.
Mm,
And when you decided to create a label and be a
mm.
designer, did that decision come intuitively to you, or did you always kind of want to represent your own universe, or did you want to work with different houses?
I mean, what I initially thought was going to happen was that I would get offered a job straight out of graduating from the Royal College of Art. But, those days had passed by then,
Yeah.
That doesn't happen so much. Maybe that happens a little bit now, but the days of waltzing in somewhere, and getting a nice
Immediate
position.
couturier
Yeah, and
position.
I had the fantasies of going to work for a couture house and learning all of the technical, I really was hungry to learn as much as I could so that I could support my work later on down the line. But that didn't happen like that. But in a way, it probably wouldn't have happened with my fantasy scenario. I wouldn't have been in the atelier every moment
Yeah.
of the day. Sitting with the modelists and the seamstresses. So I've kind of created that myself, and I work with a lot of people, and we're building our own version of couture as well. And I just work with my atelier. That's all I do. There's no sketching. There's just developing in reality all of the time. Um, but that had initially been the plan, was to go and work at a couture house and pull everything I could from that and learn, but it didn't happen. Um, but I knew I was not going to stop doing what I was doing anyway. So, with limited resources, I continued doing my work, but slowly, of course, because, it's not always, it's an expensive thing to do. So I
Yeah.
did it around other jobs that I was doing, and I did it slowly but continued to push it, and but not getting very far. So that was it. It sort of emerged out of necessity in a way, because I knew I had to do this,
Yeah.
and I knew it was the only thing that I was going to do. But I had a
How were those feelings when you first kind of started emerging on the scene, and you started under Fashionist, which is a great talent incubator.
totally.
How was it in those very first moments where you realized, okay, I have to back my own corner and I have to build my own universe?
Well, I think by the time Fashionista had happened, that was the breakthrough moment. That was like, okay, that was all. That was not the hard part in a
Mm-hmm.
way. It was easy from then on. It was to get to that moment. That was the hard thing, because it was 5 years before I
Yeah.
hit Fashionista. And that was really frustrating for me, because I felt like I was producing special work, but I couldn't get it in front of anyone. And the few people I did get in front of didn't really seem to care. And that really frustrated me and really angered me, because I remember, seeing some of the things that were thriving in London at the time, and being angry about it, because I felt like it wasn't good, and didn't deserve to
Yeah. And you know what you
supported
can
the way it
offer.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I felt a lot of frustration, but you know, I because I'm analytical about things, and I'm gonna really understand why, or I'm gonna look at something and try and see what merit it holds, essentially. And that's how I look at my own work as well. So I'm very critical of my own work before I'm critical of anyone else's work. But I remember at the time thinking, what's happening? And, why is this not
Yeah.
resonating? But I think there was a certain thing with evening wear that I was doing evening wear, which is for many people, and especially at the time, was sort of a really confusing place to way of articulating your design, um and for people to place it within the fashion landscape. It was kind of difficult
Mm.
at that time, and it wasn't seen as contemporary or modern. And there's been a real change around, even um with how it's been perceived or accepted, over the past couple of years. And I think there was a little bit of misalignment with timing. So I feel like people weren't receptive to it, because they weren't ready to see evening wear in a certain contemporary way. They
Yeah.
still couldn't understand it being contemporary, because we weren't seeing very much of it for a long
Yeah.
time. So that was one point, and I think that's why Fashionista was an important platform for me, because it's accepted that what shows a fashionista is cool. And it was, I'm not saying it was, you know, a thing of people following what they think they should follow, but there is a little bit of that in fashion.
Yeah.
But it was
Absolutely.
the platform of allowing people to see my work, and having everyone in that room to, which is, most of London, to see it up close and to see a different way and something that was unexpected for Fashionista as well, because I remember saying that, people have said that, oh no, it's not right for you, or it's not, I see you as more couture. And it's like, okay, well then where's the couture platform for me to
Yeah.
show? There
Yeah.
wasn't there wasn't one.
Where are the young designers that can, or
Yeah.
independent designers that can go into it? You
Yeah,
can't.
exactly. And so I think, it was a way of presenting me to the industry from a
Yeah.
debut point of view that they could understand, and then they could see, something fresh and exciting about the work then.
I think it's really fascinating when you talk about, 5 years of kind of finding yourself, and
Mm,
it's almost like a true artist. You have, you've gone into the micro detail, which actually really reminds me, that period of time which you talk about really reminds me about the next image, which is the
mhm,
sunset on Mars. Because
mm.
earlier you told me that you kind of went into the desert and you connected with the earth again.
Yeah, it was the metaphorical
Yeah, no, but
desert for sure.
quite
But
literally, it's,
it did feel like that.
you
It felt
know,
like there was nothing there for me, and it wasn't an industry that was friendly to me or it was
mm-hmm,
interested in me in any way. Bar like, you know, really, it was Tallulah Harlock who stood by me the entire time, and she's seen something in my work from the very beginning, and she has been, with me ever since. And you need someone who is who's championing you, that who's behind you and really doesn't let you
mm,
stop.
yeah,
So that was really important for me. And, Tallulah has understood the whole process, the whole journey from the beginning.
yeah,
But it's kind of like it's easy to stop if you don't have someone, behind you who's also sort of like, kind of trying to understand why things are not,
yeah.
moving as well, and is still
And
behind
it's
you
hard because
100%.
you're human, and oftentimes it really feels like you're pushing a rock up a hill because you, as a visionary,
Mhm.
know what you have to offer.
Yeah.
But the optics of real life get in the way, and it becomes extremely difficult
Mhm.
to showcase it. And
Totally.
it's so easy to get lost and say, you know what? And a lot of great artists and great creators, they're like, I can't keep pushing this rock
No,
uphill.
there is a cutoff point, and I
There is a
think
cutoff point.
I was reaching that cutoff point, by the time, I had applied for Fashionista. I was like, "Don't know what's gonna happen," but I fought to make sure I was there.
Yeah.
I really made sure that I was, gonna take that opportunity and
Yeah.
and
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 just go
use it.
throw everything at
And the thing is as well, like, I'm not the kind of person who wants an opportunity and then sits back. It's like, give me the opportunity and I will leap over that line, you know what I mean? I will do everything and more than you expected me to do. So I think that's kind of like how I've had to try and market myself as well. Is like, okay, I want your support, but I don't just want your support so I can have an easy ride. It's like, I want your support, and this is what I can do with your support, and this is what I can push it further with. So I think that's a really important thing that
Well,
I
you have a
feel.
message. When you
Yeah,
believe in me, it's not just believing in the optics of me. It's believing in my universe, in
mm,
my design language, in my
sure,
message.
sure. And with, anything like where I've had any support with, it's like the support is for the work. It's not for anything surrounding the work. It's for to better the work. It's all about the work and how, with limitations, you can only get so far. But then when you get some support, it allows you to kind of like show what you can
Hmm.
do, and feel like that's starting to now happen for me, where I can have an arsenal of previous work behind me that I can pull from, and
Yeah.
and technique that I've developed over several years that can be put into practice now and really put in an innovative way. Um, so yeah, I think there's so much about that sense of you know bringing something to the table when someone is supporting you, and I think that's where a lot of new designers need to think through when they're asking for something. Is like, understanding the value that you have, and but really making it clear to people that if you are supported, it's this is how you put it into practice.
Do you remember that those moments, when you first debuted your collection with Fashionist and,
Mm.
the world kind of started seeing you? What was
Mm.
that feeling for you after such a long time?
Yeah, I it was really, I think it was strange because yeah, it was a kind of an overwhelming response. Like it was incredibly welcomed, I think. And I feel like my my intention to do work that was of a certain standard was really appreciated, especially at that time in London where we had seen a little bit too much of a relaxed attitude
Mhm.
to craft and to making, to where it
Yeah.
wasn't really there anymore. Um, not totally. Of course, there were people doing amazing things, but there was a sort of a little bit too much of a relaxed, or a sort of like a sense of you could get away with something, and
Yeah.
just because you can get away with it doesn't mean that you should. And I think there was a little bit too much generosity given
Yeah.
to
Into the concept rather than the craft or the execution.
totally, or like, the total lack of any sense of wanting originality, or, or styling a collection together as opposed to designing it,
Yeah.
which I think is a really important definition to, to understand, is that, there's two types of designers. There's designers who style the collection together, and then there's designers who want to design, and have some semblance of originality with the work,
Yeah.
and they both kind of exist. But I was very keen that, it offers something new, but not novelty. That's really important to me as well, is that there's there's not really much novelty in my work, in a way. I take it quite seriously. Um, but that doesn't mean that there's not flourishes and beauty and risk that I'm introducing to it as well. So I think just seeing the reaction to it was really amazing. And just the people just I felt like it just hit it at the right time.
Yeah.
There was that sense of purity, but like complexity, hand detailing, and just a different proposition for London.
I think your technique is one of the most exciting and unique ways of crafting fashion nowadays, especially when you have, especially in London. Tell me a little bit about the technique of you started with draping and
Mm.
you almost work like as a sculptor. Your designs are very sculptural.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing almost with millimeters sometimes that
Yeah,
can make a massive difference. I'm becoming a little less strict with myself in terms of how close to the body I have been for a long time. But I kind of I had this intention to show that I understand fit really well. That's a really important thing for me, is that I think once you show you understand fit and you can fit beautifully to a form, to a body, that's kind of been my mission for 2 years, was to show I can cut well.
yeah,
That was kind of like my thing, that I wanted to really have people understand that I'm able to do a waistline, and I'm able to make something flattering, but also have an element of peculiarity in it there as well. So it's not just pretty for the sake of it. It's like slightly challenging. And I guess I've kind of explored that recently in newer work as well, where there's this balance of beauty and flattery, but also strangeness and oddity. And I do love sculptural. I love sculptural work. I love working with my hands, and I love building form and shape, and that's where I really, really enjoy,
yeah,
molding things and working with an iron to develop shape and to build things and to hand stitch, and to create these forms. And that's what I'm kind of like really enjoying, especially now, is developing those elements that and it's again, it goes back to having more skills to be able to do it. Because
Mhm.
of course I could have tried to do that earlier on, but would it have been as well executed? I don't think so. And it's like it's something that I find is it's a limitation I put on myself, and which I often put on other people as well. I'm like, unless your execution is excellent, then I don't really care about your shape or your silhouette or your design or your concept. And it's easy to sort of make this very segmented form in a way. If
Yeah.
almost, if you imagine like a pumpkin has these sort of like lines of segmentation on the, or an orange, and you know, you can carve up a piece to make these extravagant shapes. But you know, if there's a million seams in it, it's kind of pretty
Yeah.
easy to do. You can do that with masking tape as well if you wanted to.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of um, a snobbery with technical ability that I kind of put on my own work. So
Yeah.
if I see there's so too many, if we need a lot of seams to make something, I don't want to make it, then I'll find another way of doing it. So I kind of like this, you know, this purity and cleverness when it comes to cutting, but which is something you can do, you know, and you can evolve on so much. And so the sculptural quality paired with technical know-how is something that I'm really interested in continuing to develop essentially.
I think it also makes the wearer and the woman feels so natural because when you
Mm,
look at your silhouettes, it's something that makes you dive into a different world of yourself, and it makes the body look so flattered and so
mm,
extended and beautiful, but at the same time the women feel confident in wearing it, and I think
sure.
that that's very rare
Mm,
nowadays when you experiment with shape. And that also kind of leads me to the next image that you chose, which is Grace Ball by Rick Owens,
mm,
where I also saw that you almost created characters. Each look has a character,
mm.
and the models that you choose are, I think it probably goes back to your obsession with models when you were
Yeah,
younger. But each model that you choose, it's important for you to choose and cast perfectly.
totally. And of course, you know, in London we've been so limited with who we can access as well, because models don't come to London. So we've done really well in with the shows as well, and having, you know, these extraordinary models in the pieces makes a huge difference. It's kind of, it just makes it completely come alive, and a different person can give a totally different feeling to each look as well. And you know, when you work so specifically on the garments, it's interesting how extreme a change can be
Hmm.
within individual bodies. And you know, that's what I have a made to measure business, and that's where, you know, working from someone's measurements is so important. And I think that's where you can, when you have an understanding of proportion and fit and, you know, all those elements, I think that's what's really important, is that you are cutting for each person's individual form, which makes a huge difference. Um, and you know, yeah, yeah, I do have fascination with the models and choosing the right people for my work. I've always loved that image of Grace Ball. Um, she looks like a goddess essentially, and
Yeah.
you know, it's so powerful and it's so pure and so succinct in the image. And you know, I think when Grace was at the height of her career, there were not very many South Sudanese models as well. You know, of course, Alak Wek had come before her, but you know, I've always thought Grace was an amazing person, and I thought I'd love to one day be able to work with her. I think she's taken a break from fashion,
Yeah.
but maybe one day she'll come back. But I always was so arrested by that image because of the power and the purity of it. I think it's so beautiful.
What is that feeling when you create your looks and you see them out into your clients and to the people
Mm.
that love your work, and you see them out into the real world? how what is that feeling like when you actually see this work come to life?
I think it's really, it's really a challenge to properly do made to measure. It's a super, super difficult thing to do. Um, so of course I'm always nervous before fitting. Um, but I never really have that bad experience, that I
Yeah.
dream that I have a nightmare of essentially. Um, but I think it's really lovely when you see the translation and you see how you've sort of supported someone with the look, and you've sort of worked to their proportions and worked to their body, and you see it looking really, really beautiful and really special. And it's, of course we're working from our samples from the show, and as beautiful as they may be, there's always something you can enhance on them and you
Mhm.
can improve on when you come to a client. So it's like that full. Of course, I don't do production for stores. I only make as ordered by individual clients. And I think you get that full resolution of the garment as well. You're like, okay, we've changed a little bit here. This was really beautiful, but now we've had time to look back. We understand that it's better supported in this way. So it is like the full life of the garment, and you see how you've been able to refine it and make it appropriate for someone.
I think it's really beautiful the way you approach fashion in such a sober and open way of the fashion always changes. The clothes that we put on our
Hmm.
body are important
Yeah.
because they, just like ourselves, change. And your attention to detail with your client has almost made you like the modern couturier in the way, I
Not quite yet, but I'd like to see it going in that direction.
and I think you're just on the right path for it because
Mm.
I've spoken to a few women in my time who have pieces from you, and they just feel so empowered, and they feel themselves. They see a true reflection. And I think for me, the nucleus and why I love Fashionist so much is when I see a true reflection of my feelings, my moods, whether that's a vulnerable or a happy or a sad one.
Mm.
When you have that and when you see exactly who you want to be in that mirror, I think that's one of the most empowering things you can do.
Yeah, sure. And I think what you have to be when you do that is really honest about what works and what doesn't work.
Hmm.
And it's and of course my design is, the starting point, but it's about understanding that you can't fight something if it isn't working, and to find you know, the right iteration of it for the person is the way to do it. And I
Yeah.
think it always comes down to that proportion and having an eye for what suits, an analytical eye of what suits someone's body, and how you can best achieve the best result for them. And I think that is really an interesting thing, and I think that's what makes you a better designer. And that's what I've found. It's making me a better designer working with clients.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that I have to change my aesthetic in any way. It's just that I understand so much more, because it's easy to dress the models. It's really easy. There's nothing to do there, really, And there's a standardization of the figure in many ways, um, where there's not too much difference between
Yeah.
a straight size model. Um, but I think I just find it really interesting, and actually I'm learning so much from working with individual clients. And I think that's what is making me a better designer, I think, for sure.
Yeah. And it's to kind of see the real life application, to see real life
Totally.
bodies and real life
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And how someone wants to wear it and where they're going to wear it. And there is that sort of modern ritual of like, it's like there's a certain ceremony in the place. Not everyone wears an evening dress, and not everyone has the opportunity that they need it. But there are people that you know have a special moment, and they want something special to kind of match that, and And that is that sort of modern ritual or that modern ceremony that we have now. And there's something I find interesting about transformational dressing
Mhm.
where, it's this moment where someone is not transformed into someone new in any way, of course, which is what we were just talking about, but it's more this sort of heightened self or this sort of like moment where you kind of you wear something quite special and
Yeah.
it is transformational for you.
And it's also that appreciation of self in a way,
Totally, yeah. Yeah.
self-celebration.
Yeah, exactly.
I I want to talk to you about the last image that you chose, which is actually your new campaign
Yeah.
that you're just releasing, and I think this image really represents kind of a full circle of your fascination and your first stages of finding your
Yeah.
identity and
Yeah.
the work now. So tell me a little bit about what you
Yeah,
chose
this is
there.
this is the most recent project I've done, and I think that it does sum a lot of things up. It's like, it's funny, myself and Tallulah have been talking about this shoot for 7 years, from when we first sort of met each other. Maybe it's a little bit longer than 7 years now. And we had talked about working with Jack Davidson and Saskia DeBrow and shooting in the landscape, and we finally got to do it this year. And it was a really nice moment for both of us because we had set the intention to do it, and it took us a long time to do it, but we did it, and it's really special for me. And I kind of it's this culmination of the stone, the body, the landscape, the sky, and this sort of celestial element of whether these stones are floating or they're celestial bodies, or
Yeah,
there's even the biblical connotations with it as well. And I think there's something really interesting about the power of the form against the sky with the stones levitating. And you know it's it's nice to now start to be able to express the work like that, and with people um who I've been fortunate to work with, and I think that there's not a huge amount of difference from some of the earliest work I've done as well, and I think that that's what's really nice about it. It's a further iteration, not moving away massively from where I begun, but there's these multitude of possibilities within one idea, and I think that's where I kind of become a little bit obsession focused as well on the fact that there's this endless possibility with a technique or
yeah.
with a vision, and you may never actually get that total satisfaction, but I think with this image it kind of sums so much of my world into one piece.
And I think that one of the reasons why you keep going for it and developing things is because you're never gonna feel. I think the
Mm,
the true life of an artist is that they're never gonna feel the I made it moment, because for
totally.
you it's because you live in this universe. You always are. That universe expands and expands and expands, and I think that's also the exciting part of
Yeah,
it.
I agree, and I think yeah, that's the thing of not necessarily ripping everything I do to shreds, but I do a lot of that, after I've created something. I'm like, okay, right, let's really have a look at this now, and let's
Yeah.
see where we can improve it, and how you can develop it further. So, yeah, I think it really is that lifelong pursuit of perfection, or of trying to really become someone who truly understands the medium that they're
Yeah.
working in. I think that's really important to have that ambition, at least, whether you ever reach it or not. But it's the intention to want to continue to develop. I think that's the most important thing.
And looking into the future, do you have an idea what the Standing Ground universe expands into?
I mean, it's so interesting to try and think forward. I mean, I know that I want to do this for a long time. And I know it's just this sort of continuation of craft and innovation paired with it. Um, but I think it's so difficult to know. It's so difficult to know what the landscape will be. Um, but it is really, something that I intend to do for a long time. And it can change. It's the medium can change, and it can be done in different ways. But I think there's sort of something about just the intention to keep it small, to keep it strong, and to keep things moving, not necessarily at the fastest pace. I don't feel the need to impress the fashion world constantly. It's like I don't feel the pressure of this 6 month cycles.
Mm.
So if I don't show for a year and a half or 2 years, then that doesn't personally worry me. I don't feel the pressure of feeling that someone's going to forget me, because if they do forget me, then they can just rediscover it at a later point and it's going to be something different. Um, so I think that's a really important thing for the future of what I do, is that it's not led by this panicked sort of
Mhm.
anxiety of what, oh, everyone's going to forget. And it's like, well, that's fine if they forget, and they don't need to, remember. Of course, I need to sustain my business, and I need to continue working with my clients. That goes without saying. That will continue to happen. But in terms of showing and how I present the work, it's very much when it's ready, and when I feel it's strong enough, and when I can present it the way I want to present it, because you know showing is expensive, and
Yeah.
it might be a mismanagement of funds to kind of continuously show. Depends on what your end goal is with your work. For someone else, it might be the right thing to do, who's riding the crest of a wave, for instance, that they understand that there's a sort of shorter end goal, or shorter time bracket on what they need to put out to get to where they want to be. But I feel like mine's a little bit indulgent in a way, because it's a bit selfish how I kind of operate. But that's how I feel I'll make good work, by kind of doing what I feel is right within this certain time frame. So I don't feel that pressure. So it's just about continuing to build it and improve it, and just yeah.
Michael Stewart, thank you so much for being on Fashion Forensics.
Thank you.